This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Today, Frida, we're going to talk about one of the true crown jewels of the national parks of Lake Superior, and that, of course, is Isle Royale National Park, and a little bit about how it all runs and how 1 or 2 people can make it all run, and it's a team, but this is going to be a good chat here, I think.
You know, for anybody that's planning a trip over to Isle Royale this summer, they are really going to want to listen to Chris because he has all the scoop. He is the guy that you go to, and he is here with us.
Yeah, we are ready to talk now to Chris Amidon, who is the Supervisory Park Ranger of Interpretation and Visitor Services at Isle Royale National Park. And there's even more to it than that, but we'll start with that. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Walt and Frida. It's great to be here.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your career. I mean, we'll get into some of the literal hats that you wear under the job, but how did your career get you to Isle Royale National Park?
I have been a park ranger for 25 years going on this year. 24 years of that in interpretation and visitor services. My very first year as a trail crew member working trails way back in Wind Cave. But I love working with people. I love sharing the park and the stories for every park I've worked with. The last 9 years, I've been here at Isle Royale. Before that, I was over in Minnesota at Voyagers for 4 years. I'm from Michigan. My wife is from Wisconsin, and we are Northwoods, born and bred, and we love Lake Superior country. And so we've been very happy in this area.
That's so good to hear because really when you look at the scope of things, I heard once upon a time, Chris, I'm not sure if it's exactly true, but there are more visitors to Yellowstone in a day than come to Isle Royale in the whole year. But then the folks that do come to Isle Royale, they return because they just know it's such a gem.
Absolutely, and there is truth in that. So one of the many things I do is I oversee the statistics for the park, and a really busy season is 30,000 people, and Yellowstone is approximately 4 million. However, that's not the whole story because, approximately a third of that is only in Houghton at the mainland, and a really busy Isle Royale summer is 20,000 people, and that's what we did last year. And it doesn't seem like a lot, except Isle Royale visitation happens mainly June, July, and August. Mm-hmm. And so it's all compressed, and it's all coming into our 2 main ports of call, Rock Harbor and Wendigo-Azagating. And so you do see a lot of people during that time.
So, okay, now you talk about being a Supervisory Park Ranger of Interpretation and Visitor Services. Let's start right there. What does that mean when we hear that? And then we'll get into some of these other responsibilities that you have.
Absolutely. I work with people. If it's something about telling the story of Isle Royale, of helping people trip plan, I help people experience the park, and that is through all the different things that I do. So I help run the visitor centers. When you talk to a ranger, if you're here in Houghton, you work with my staff, you'll talk with them on the phone, we reply to the emails, we provide information to help people understand how to have an enjoyable visit, how to navigate the logistics of traveling to Isle Royale. But then I also work in secondary media. So, I do the brochures, I do the newspapers every year, I do the website, or my staff does, to try to provide the most accurate and timely information for folks for planning, but also while they're here. If it has to do with people and helping them experience and understand the park, that is what I do.
Ah, bless you, bless you. And let's talk about that, because folks are getting ready. They are loading up that backpack and they're saying, do I really need to take that library book? What do I really need? Do I really need a hairdryer at Isle Royale, right?
Yeah.
How do you prepare them?
Absolutely. So the first thing we ask is, what type of experience are you looking to have? And there are three main experiences with other ones available too. And number one is backpacking and camping. Number two is staying at the Rock Harbor Lodge, which is kind of full amenities. And number three is boating or bringing a boat. And they all have their own kind of worlds of what you would bring. If you're staying at the Rock Harbor Lodge, you have a lot of leeway of what you can bring. You can bring that hairdryer in your backpack and luggage. However, if you're overnight camping and backpacking, you probably want to minimize as much of the extra stuff as possible so you don't have to carry it on your back. And then if you're bringing your own boat, it's like car camping on the mainland, except you just bring it in a boat. So there's a little bit more flexibility with that, up to, of course, what fits in your boat.
Sure. Now, I got to ask you this. So how do you tell first-timers the story of how to get to the island?
Certainly. We find ways to have the conversation in the best possible way. So number one is, what type of experience do you want to have? Because that will dictate potentially how they will get to the park to experience it. And so we find out what they want to do, and then we find out where are they traveling from, Michigan or Minnesota, to help understand the various options for different transportations, whether they're traveling from Michigan in a ferry or a seaplane, or they're traveling from Minnesota in a ferry. Their experience will be different depending on their transportation choice, so we let them know their options and what they can do when they choose a transportation option.
Because if you do go, correct me, Chris, but if you do go by the float plane, your gear is weighed along with you, and there might not be, even if you're staying at Rock Harbor Lodge, you might not be able to bring, 8 suitcases of summer, winter, fall, spring clothing that you can all experience in one afternoon at Isle Royale, of course.
That is right on. Every transportation operates a little differently and has different specifics. With the seaplane, you only can bring 45 pounds, and they will waive your pack and require that. So absolutely, knowing your transportation will constrain the types of things that you can bring, the amount you can bring. But generally, most people access the park using a ferry, and every ferry has a different weight limit, so you have to check with the specific ferry company for those details.
Now, you mentioned Houghton, Michigan. You're talking to us from Houghton, which is in Michigan of the Keweenaw Peninsula, which, of course, is also where you can find the Keweenaw National Historical Park. All of this ties into the fact that that is where you have a base of both the seaplane and also the Ranger 3, which is probably one of the best-known ways of getting to Isle Royale. When you're telling these stories to these people, first-timers, I think of someone listening to our podcast that has really no reference to this trip. The trip on the Ranger in particular, the vessel, that's a commitment, but it's also what an amazing adventure.
It is. Part of the Isle Royale experience is the transportation to the island. It's that extra step that most parks don't have, where you can just drive there, and it starts your experience before you are even in the park, because you start meeting people. There's an anticipation of being able to see the island on the horizon, whether you're in a ferry or a seaplane. And so, yeah, it's a whole nother component to the experience that begins what it means to travel to this remote island of Lake Superior.
And we need to let folks know that the Ranger is 6 hours. It's not like a quick ferry ride over to Mackinac Island or something like that. It's 6 hours. And you know what I love about it, Chris? Going over, there's this anticipation, of course. But for me, coming back and everyone's sharing their stories. I came back one time with a group of Boy Scouts, and I said, what was the most interesting thing? First of all, they couldn't wait to get back and have pizza, but they also said, yeah, I remember when Jimmy got that leech on his thumb in Chicken Bone Lake, and he squeezed it real hard, and all the babies came out or something. And I was like, what a story to go home with. It was like, okay, I'm glad that didn't happen to me, but I sure am glad that those Boy Scouts will remember that forever.
I could not agree more, Frida, right? I mentioned that anticipation. Everybody's excited for what the experience will be. And yes, on that return, people are sharing the stories. Because of the transportation, you make lifelong friends because they're having similar experiences or hearing about different areas of Isle Royale that they didn't see, and so they want to plan a return trip because you mentioned people do return, and that is very true. Because of these shared stories and these shared experiences, it's wonderful to be a part of that.
We're talking with Supervisory Park Ranger of Interpretation and Visitor Services at Isle Royale National Park, Chris Amidon, today. And we touched on it, Chris. You wear a lot of hats that you've already talked about, including now there's one that we'll get into in just a moment, the Artist in Residence Coordinator. Is there a favorite part of this, or is it just a complete sort of amalgamation of all these duties that you really enjoy?
Yes, that latter aspect is certainly true. I love wearing many hats and doing different things. I'm the kind of person that likes to do lots of different things, whether it's working on a newspaper or collecting stats or training staff to run a visitor center. You mentioned the Artist in Residence program, and so if I do have a soft spot, it's absolutely that kind of small portion of my duties that help oversee this very specific yet iconic program of Isle Royale, the Artist in Residence program. That's kind of my soft spot.
I remember I was able to do a documentary on the first Artist in Residence program back in the early 90s. And we had 4 very different artists. So we had a pinhole camera photographer, we had a sculptor, we had a poet. And then, of course, we also got a chance to include Buddy Sievertson, who was that classic, the legend, watercolor artist and storyteller. So this year, can you share with us what kind of artists we might be having over there to be inspired by that rock and woods and waters?
Absolutely, yes. So we go through a jury selection process in the spring, and this year we had 250 artists competing for what ultimately turned out for 3 spaces, so very competitive. This year we have Riley McManus, who is a ceramics artist who works on impressions. He takes impressions of natural objects, rocks and bark, and turns them into ceramic artwork. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful. We have a poet who works in Shakespearean sonnets. Her name is Victoria Reynolds, and we really look forward to kind of this very specific written word focus, this Shakespearean sonnet format. And then we have Cindy Weeks, who is a found object assemblage artist. Now, she won't be using Isle Royale materials to make found art, but she will be inspired by the island to go back and find found objects in her local communities that then create a piece inspired by Isle Royale. 3 very different mediums, all that are going to bring a very specific perspective and essentially increase the audience of what it means to connect with Isle Royale in new and different ways. One other aspect I want to mention, in 2016, we started a secondary component of the Artist in Residence program. It is the Teen Artist Exploration. And so for about a week, once a summer, we bring 2 teen artists between the ages of 13 to 18 to Isle Royale, and they work with a teen artist mentor from the Copper Country Community Arts Center here in Hancock. And they get a step into both an artistic residency that's mentored, but of course experiencing the wilderness of Lake Superior and Isle Royale as they're essentially learning and growing through the teen years. And these 2 components provide 2 very different artistic lenses for what it means to be inspired by Isle Royale, and I absolutely love the types of things that are created by these experiences.
So how do you work? And I can hear when you're making these comments here about these artists in residence, it's telling the story of Isle Royale in unique and new and interpretive ways. How do you tell that story? I mean, how do you tell someone maybe that's a first timer or a veteran what to expect? How do you, I mean, obviously you're someone that's passionate about this. You love talking about this. We can hear that in your voice. But how do you tell them? I mean, what do you share with first timers and veterans in particular?
So it all begins with the park being established. So the first thing we do as interpretive rangers, is we look at why did Congress or the president create the national park or the park unit. So in Isle Royale's case, when it was authorized in 1931, there's specific reasons why it was authorized. And sometimes those meanings do change and evolve or adapt. And so from that legislation and from those adaptations, we look at the stories that are meaningful for the park existence. And at Isle Royale, it's things around geology. It's in terms of the island archipelago and its existence. It's stories around the maritime culture, whether that's commercial fisheries of days long gone by, whether it's lighthouse and shipwreck and maritime history of the Lake Superior shipping channels, whether it's the specific ecology that is based on the topography and just weather patterns of Isle Royale. All of these things kind of are taken from those primary and original sources and then adapted for the types of stories and programs that we give in the various formats, whether that's a ranger program in Rock Harbor or Wendigo when people are in the park, or perhaps that's an online artist-in-residence exhibit like we have on our website. So we use various different tools and mediums to tell various components of the stories.
Fascinating, and I'm so appreciative because I remember the story that the reason or how it all developed way back when the national parks were first established. And was it Teddy Roosevelt that said to Thomas Moran, the famous landscape artist, that we can't make this happen in our country based on any kind of a practical sense. We need to make sure that it's the art that comes forward. And that's what secures in our heart the reason we need to set these places aside. So hats off to you for having those artists come year after year. And, you know, I was thinking back, it must have been 50 years, 60 years earlier. We did a podcast with Tom Haas. We lost Tom. He passed away in December, but he did a book of Isle Royale and his black and white photos that he was taking from the time he was 19 till it was another a 20, 30-year love affair, actually a lifelong love affair with Isle Royale, but he was there with his pinhole type camera and taking those photos, and we still get to experience, that book was just published, and we still get to experience what he saw at the island, 60 years ago.
It is fascinating when we talk about this because, I mean, I grew up in the Copper Country. I grew up where actually just about where Chris is talking to us from today, and I'm very familiar with Isle Royale, and it's always been there. The Ranger has always been there to run to the island, and the seaplanes have always flown over the waterway and the Keweenaw and such, but Chris, when we talk about the island and you talk about this, when you get talking with people, they probably have heard something, they've looked into it. Maybe do they ask you about things like the wildlife, a wolf, a moose? Is it likely that maybe they're going to see one? What are those kinds of tips and things that you can share with them about that?
Definitely. I would say, we do lots of trip planning in the Houghton office for the staff before people get to Isle Royale. The two most common questions, number one is, when are the bugs going to be bad? This is the north winds, mosquitoes and black flies, so that's always ongoing. And yes, then the second one is will I be able to see a moose or a wolf, or both? Because we consider these charismatic megafauna. These are the big creatures that are just awe-inspiring to come across in the wild. And so definitely, Isle Royale being the type of island and experience that it is, it has lots of valleys and ridges and dense vegetation. It's not easy to see wildlife very often, but you definitely can come across it. So first off, the moose. It is very common, whether you're hiking along the trail or maybe you're looking across an interior lake, to eventually during your trip to come across a moose. Isle Royale is not that big, 40 miles long, approximately 8 to 10 miles wide. You generally have a very good opportunity to come across moose. And when you do, it's all about just observing quietly from a distance. Lots of folks will have the story if you go around a bend in the trail and there's the moose butt right in front of you. And then you just slowly back away until it's a fair distance away, and you just watch it do what it does. Most of the time, they really are unconcerned about human beings. But every once in a while, that's not the case. And you just want to make sure that you put your distance between you or have a rock or a tree between you so they can't see you. Moose, they move on pretty quick, and when they don't sense a threat because they no longer can see you or sense you, then they just wander off. So encountering a moose is really a magical moment. And I remember backpacking a trip I did with my daughter, who was 13 at the time, and seeing the moose come out of Feltman Lake with the waters cascading off their antlers and the sunrise in the background. Those are the types of experiences that Isle Royale offer just by putting yourself in this remote island setting. There's no guarantee, but it's magical when it happens.
I got to say this, charismatic megafauna, you called it? I love that term.
Yes, charismatic megafauna. Those iconic animals that are truly inspiring to see.
A wolf is probably not nearly as common. I'm sure that they're probably more stealthy, and they also understand to keep a distance to a certain extent, right?
Historically, yes. It was incredibly rare to see a wolf. Previously to 2024, we might get, a handful, 2 or 3 or half a dozen reports of sightings of wolves. Very, very rare. In 2024, things changed because some of the younger new wolf pups began encountering human food sources in Rock Harbor, and they started to act differently than the wolves have ever reacted before in Isle Royale. And so, yes, suddenly we started to see wolves much more often. Now, we're just starting the season, and the first staff just went off the last week or so to start opening up the island for 2025. So we aren't certain what this summer situation is going to be yet, although over the coming weeks that will come clear. However, we are very aware of the situation that occurred last year and are taking steps to mitigate the negative human and wolf interactions that were occurring last year for this year. It is amazing if you see a wolf, but you absolutely want to keep your distance.
Right.
And if for some reason that wolf is not doing what it should, which is really wandering away because they shouldn't care about you, then to make yourself big and make that wolf want to go away.
Okay, so now you mentioned something where the wolves are starting to interact with human food sources, etc. Was there an issue with how food was being stored by visitors? Was there something there? Is there information or a rule of thumb or something about keeping that from happening?
Yes, so there are new food storage regulations for 2025 to combat and mitigate what was happening last year. Because this had never been an issue, we didn't have secure garbage cans or food storage lockers or some of the things returning visitors will now see on the island at Wendigo, Ozagatang, and Rock Harbor. So there's going to be new food-related things, including garbage cans and lockers in various places. But the biggest change is that food storage containers are required. And another name for a food storage container is a bear canister, because most food storage has to do with preventing bears from getting it. At Isle Royale, no bears. So we're not calling it a bear canister. It's a food storage container. They are required.
That really is such a difference. I know one of the beauties of being at Isle Royale in the past, especially for us when we were kayaking and circumnavigating, we never had to hang our food. We were safe, except there is the fox.
Yes.
And maybe you don't necessarily have to protect your food from the fox, but you need to protect your boots. Share with us a little bit about that, Chris.
Well, that's an excellent point, Frida, that the food storage regulations are certainly, I would say, inspired now to combat the wolf concerns, but it relates to the foxes, the red squirrels, and the gray jays, which have always been kind of those camp nuisances that will fly down and grab your trail mix if you set it down out of your hand, or the foxes that have historically sometimes run away with people's boots. And so one of the regulations in place for this year is that items should never be left unattended, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're camping with your boots, they should be in your shelter or your tent so the fox can't run away with them overnight and have fun with it. That doesn't happen often, right? But every year it seems like once or twice a fox will get playful and do that.
Better safe than sorry, though, for the visitor, I'm sure. So we're talking with Chris Amidon today, who is Supervisory Park Ranger of Interpretation at Visitor Services at Isle Royale National Park. Now, Chris, this spring here, we had some damages over at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, Munising Falls. In that area, the trail was washed out with some of the heavy rains. We had a lot of snow runoff. That trail is now closed until further notice. How did things make through the winter on early reports at Isle Royale? Are there any things like that had happened there?
Certainly, nothing that significant that's being reported at this time, but it's early, right? The first crew of about a dozen folks went out last week. Another crew just went out, and so we're ramping up. However, we do have a few very hardy folks that are early season visitors to Isle Royale that are really roughing it out there, and they're already reporting that, as expected, there's still deep snow on north-facing trails. Not surprising with the amount of snow we had here this winter. Lots of trees down on the trails. That's not usually anything out of the normal, though. And as we get going, eventually the trail crew will get that and will clear the trails. But any early season visitors should certainly be aware, right? We're in spring conditions, which means the trails are not clear. There's snow on the trails, usually through May, especially on the north slopes. Outside of those two conditions, it's so far a pretty typical kind of opening start.
And it does bear mentioning we're recording this particular episode of the Lake Superior podcast in sort of early May. So between now and a month from now, and definitely 2 months from now, a lot of that will be addressed. But really good advice there, though, to know that things are, Frida, they're certainly kind of wintry in some spots, and people need to be aware of that, too, as they're heading over. So, yeah.
Chris, I know at Pictured Rocks, they are using a lot of battery-operated equipment to clear the trail. Are you guys also?
So it depends specifically on the regulations of use on the specific areas in the park. So portions of Isle Royale, 99 approximately % of Isle Royale is wilderness. And so in wilderness, you're not allowed to use modern hand tools or wheeled devices or those types of things. However, there are exceptions built into our regulations for spring startup to do things like be able to clear trails with chainsaws. But eventually, as we get to about mid-June, those regulations are no longer allowed for the full experience for kind of the island solitude in the backcountry. But we do have kind of exceptions to get things going at the start of the season. But yeah, being a wilderness, much more restrictions in terms of what we're able to do to clear the trails. It's a lot more work.
Now, it's been really good talking with you about this. I could just tell that how much you just love talking about Isle Royale. For someone that is listening here to the episode today and they want to find out more information, they want to find out about all of these various aspects of it, what's a good way to find that?
Two sources to start. Number one is certainly the Isle Royale National Park website that if you Google Isle Royale will pop up. That's a great starting place. There is so much information there, whether it's trip planning or ferries or historical information, but it can be very overwhelming because it's not as simple as jumping in your car and showing up. We already talked a little bit about planning for ferries and that type of stuff. The second one is when you do get stuck and you aren't certain, my staff that work here in the Houghton office, this is what we do. It's trip planning. And it's to call our number, 906-482-0984, where you will talk with a park ranger about your experience and figure out, well, is it better for me to travel from Michigan or better for me to travel to Minnesota? Is this area where I want to go to have the experience I want, or maybe I want to go to the other end of Isle Royale? We are happy to talk through those conversations with folks.
Being there for 9 years, Chris, do you have a favorite campsite or a favorite trail?
I have too many to name. What I'll say is, every year I go, I have different experiences, right? And there are so many wonderful places. The trails and the campground exist in the places that they do because these are the places people were going when the park began. It's the beautiful overlooks. It's the campgrounds on the lakes with good water sources and beautiful views. There are really no places that I wouldn't say you should go because it's the whole package. The thing about Isle Royale is there are no destinations where you think, I have to go see this specific point to see Isle Royale. It's all about the whole experience. And, whether that's backpacking or boating or staying at the lodge, it's just about being there in this isolated, remote island wilderness. And where you go, it's going to be similar no matter where you go, just with specific differences, whether you're in Wendigo or whether you're in Rock Harbor or you're backpacking. There are so many. There are just so many. I love so many places.
I think that's why folks always keep coming back to, one of the things I see on the Facebook posts or wherever, and people saying, I'm going to do end to end in 2 days or 3 days or 4 days. And you're like, why?
Don't rush it.
Take your time. That's the thing I always underline when anybody's going to Isle Royale.
Yes, thank you. This is one thing I reiterate all the time. I've talked to thousands and thousands of visitors. No one has ever complained about spending too much time on Isle Royale or backpacking or visiting. I talk to people all the time that say, I wish I had one more day. I wish I had taken 4 days or 5 days instead of 3 days. If you're going to visit Isle Royale, try to take as much time as you can because you will enjoy every minute of it.
Chris Amidon with us here today. He is the Supervisory Park Ranger of Interpretation and Visitor Services, amongst many other things at Isle Royale National Park. Chris, it's just been a pleasure having you on. And just the energy, it's like it makes people want to come to it. And if they're willing to make the commitment, they're not going to be let down, are they?
Absolutely not. It is a lifetime experience that stays with you. And as you've said repeatedly, we see lots of people come back because it becomes part of them. Yeah. And there's a reason Isle Royale is a national park. There is no place like it anywhere else on the planet, and it's a lifetime experience.
Chris, thanks for your time today. It's been a pleasure having you on,
Absolutely.
Man. It's been a lot of fun.
You are so very welcome. The pleasure is all mine.
It's Chris Amidon, who is the Supervisory Park Ranger of Interpretation and Visitor Services at Isle Royale National Park. Like I said a moment ago, amongst all the other hats that he wears. But what a guy. Just a excitable kind of person that really has a passion for this. And like many that we've talked to on this podcast, I think what it is it's the power of the big lake. It's the power of being able to be so close to it that we really hear with folks like Chris.
He's really infectious,
Yeah.
And I have to go over June 12th, I think, is my work duty day over there. And I'm going to be in Wendigo. And you know what? I mean, Walt, that's like the height of the bugs. The bugs, I'm going to be a quart low. But, right now, Chris just makes me feel like, yeah, what the heck? Let's go. I've got a head net.
There you go. If there's anybody out there that knows how to prepare for this, it's you. But that's pretty much going to do it here for this episode of the Lake Superior podcast. But as we always remind you, if there's something you'd like to hear us talk about on the podcast, you can get a hold of us through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. Give us your ideas. We want to hear about more stories around the big lake, all the folks with not only the national parks, but the communities and the people and the places that make it special. And we do want to hear from you. And of course, be sure to share this podcast with all your friends as well, so more people get to know about the National Parks of Lake Superior. I'm Walt Lindala.
I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.